Good to see you here. Just a couple of announcements. First of all, so you know we have on the syllabus it says there's 5 quizzes during the semester, and that we're going to drop one. So I've got good news and bad news. I guess the bad news is there's 1 extra quiz. We're going to go to 6. The good news is we're going to let you drop 2 instead of 1. So that way, I know there have been some of you for different reasons that have, for poor health or family emergency or different reasons that have missed. So this way, it will make it easier for you to be able to drop 2 quizzes. So we'll drop you 2 votes. And so that means we still have 2 more than the rest of the semester instead of just the 1. Okay. So hopefully that works for everyone. Also, can I just get, I know Kyle has sent out, we want to get sort of an RSVP for Mark Gottfredson's presentation talk on Friday. How many of you are planning to attend that on Friday?
What time is it on Friday?
1 o'clock. 1 o'clock in 710, so it's right up, it's the sort of larger room that's on the 7th floor on the north side. So again, just raise your hand just so I get all right. Yeah, Mark's really good. We just saw some of the slide deck. I think he's got some interesting things. So if you could just RSVP to Kyle's, send out an email just so we make sure we know how many are coming to that event. Any questions about that? Yeah.
He's doing the executive lecture series that morning as well. Is it the same lecture he's giving again for
Different.
us? Different.
Are you in the executive lecture series? So he is doing something unique for us. And yeah, so Cheryl Macbeth, who helps handle the executive lecture series, she said it's a different presentation. She just forwarded it. And yeah, he's doing something that is much more dense for us because he expects more from this group. He knows you can absorb more and take more.
Do you know how long that goes for?
It'll be 1 hour, so he'll do it for about 40 minutes, and then he'll have about a 15-20 minute Q&A.
Okay.
Yes?
Is it going to be accessible like via internet?
I'm going to try and get it videotaped. Yeah. I'm going to try and get it videotaped. So if we can, we want to try and make it available. But so I knew Mark when we were back in the Boston office. So this is back 1984 is when I started. He was already there. He'd already been there, I think, 3 or 4 years. Got his MBA at Harvard. Then he was actually the one that started the Dallas office. So he is like the founder of the Dallas office, was the managing partner there for years and years. I think he stepped away from that when he went to serve a mission in Japan. He actually left Bain as a partner. Think about your opportunity cost to leave Bain as a partner for 3 years. So I mean, I don't know what his opportunity cost was, but it had to be at least $1 million a year. So that's a pretty good sacrifice he's making to serve just like anybody else. And he's been back now for 10 years, and he's published a number of times, and he's one of the few at Bain that have published in Harvard Business Review. He has I'm not sure exactly what the sells were, but he did a very good selling strategy book. It's really good. Any other questions? Yeah. Not particularly. Yeah. Look decent. You don't have to dress like a carrot. But if you want to up your game, you could dress like no, what you wear is just fine. Okay, any other questions? All right, so today we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to actually give you a problem, sort of a challenge, and you're going to work in teams for 20 minutes to come up with some ideas for how we might address this challenge. And let me set the challenge for you. Over the years, those of you, I think most of you are probably members of the LDS Church. We've heard talks from different church leaders addressing the issue of the relationship between men and women, and in particular, men treating women with equal respect. So one talk by President Kimball, he said, men do not always treat women with equal respect. Many of you have probably read one of the talks by H. Burke Peterson about unrighteous dominion. And sort of a quote from one of those is, men sometimes exercise unrighteous dominion, implying that they are in a superior position than women. So this is the innovation challenge today. How can we innovate in the church? What kinds of changes or things could the church leadership do so that both men and women would be more likely to treat women with equal respect? This is both men and women. Because I've heard from many women that sometimes women also feel that women don't necessarily treat each other with sort of equal respect, or the respect that they would give to a man. Okay? How could we innovate in the church? So, people will say, well, what are the guidelines, or what are the limits? What can we change and what can we not change? Okay, so right now, while we know that women perform priesthood ordinances in the temple, at this point in time, because at least throughout sort of the history of the scriptures, women have not exercised the priesthood outside of the temple. I would say at that point, this is sort of a doctrine, not a policy. So at this point, doctrine. So you know that's one change. You can't say what we want to do is we want to start having women perform priesthood ordinances outside the temple. Policy, though, I still remember when I was a kid, for a long time, men were the ones that prayed in sacrament meeting. It's like, why? Somebody asked the question, and then it changed. Some things are tradition. They're not necessarily doctrine. And so what I want you to do, and you're going to do this in different teams than what you normally work in, so that you get to know some different folks. I want you to meet. You're going to actually meet in your teams, and we'll just break up around the classroom. If there are 2 or 3 teams that want to just sort of go out and sit in the chairs out there, you can do that. And you're going to have 20 minutes to brainstorm ideas for this and come back. Then we'll go around and I'll have each team share 1 or 2 of those ideas. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and I want to go through and I want to start to get some ideas. So, team one, give us an idea. Go ahead and just find a place to sit. I think people have sort of changed locations. So team one, give us an idea.
So we feel like a lot of people in the church don't know the difference between an actual priesthood ordinance and doctrine and things that are tradition. So if the church came out and says, these are exactly the things that are part of an ordinance and priesthood, but these things aren't, such as like a woman holding a baby in the circle, or a mother choosing who to pray in the home. Those are more traditions.
Okay.
So if they come out and they explicitly say what is and what isn't part of an ordinance, and then as we teach children in the church and in conference, we teach the roles as equal roles, which is kind of happening right now. But we basically teach, this is, how did you explain it?
Like right now, it's like, let us tell you why men are different and equal, women are different and equal. So like that equal but separate kind of the help type mentality almost sometimes. Instead of like teaching, so here's parenthood. Here is this union that is like the perfection thing that we're going for, and here's the qualities about it. And teaching it kind of is that one, like similar how we teach about the Godhead, instead of here's these equal but separate.
Okay, so this relates to, again, something around teaching. This is starting with people in their youth, but something about the union between a man and a woman, and somehow there's equality that we need to really understand and be able to articulate. And that even maybe we struggle a little bit today articulating. Okay, is team 2 here?
Right here.
Okay, team 2, give us.
So what we have is we have kind of 2 like high-level ideas. What I'm going
Okay.
to do is then list just a couple of sub-ideas underneath those high-level ones.
Okay.
So the first one is altering the image and perception that people have of women in the church.
Okay.
And so some of the sub-things underneath that, for example, are women sitting on the stand. We all know why Relief Society presidents or whatever don't sit on the stand.
Okay.
Conducting. having like a teaching program built up to almost like the Come Follow Me for the youth, but more like men and women being equal. So have that kind of program go through. And let's see what else we have here. So we have moving like like Relief Society broadcast, moving that to the same week as general conference. It's kind of its own separate thing, and then there's general conference.
Okay.
So that's for altering image. And we have lots of other ideas along with that, but I'll move on to then altering the structure within the church.
Okay.
What I mean by that is having like women in Sunday school presidencies.
Okay.
Right now it's just men, and that's a tradition. Also having women actually conduct. Right now women don't conduct in sacrament.
Okay.
So those are some examples, as well as a joint like youth presidencies and stuff like that.
Okay. So here, like sitting on the stand, or maybe the Relief Society president has her own office
That is
at the church, with Bishop might, something like that. Okay, team 3. Are you guys here? Yeah.
Okay, so we like the idea of women sitting on stands because we feel like that's a really visual representation of like males sitting above, looking down at the congregation, and it's feels good. But what we propose is rather than having the Relief Society president sit on the stand, because elders, born presidents, high priest group leaders don't sit on the stand, we suggest having like 2 counselors / advisors to the bishopric that are females that will sit on the stand. And along with the role of counseling with the bishopric, they could also participate in other administrative issues such as tithing, dealing with tithing and dealing with finances, which is now males. In addition, we thought about having women participating in home teaching. So right now, women only visit teach other women. But having maybe husband and wife pairs, or women visiting families and getting a different perspective. And in addition, having women teach priesthood forms during the 3rd hour or whatever you have.
Okay. And maybe men occasionally teaching vice versa.
Like one Sunday a month.
Okay, where did I put team 4? Here or here? Team 4? Okay, team 4.
So I'll speak to the first point. A lot of this is overlap. So the first point that we wanted to change was administrative. So this would be very similar to the structure.
Okay.
So this would be things like ward mission leader. We'd also be able to be a woman.
Okay.
Or things like the Sunday school presidency, which is currently all male, would also be able to be called into those same roles. So that would be kind of the first point that we changed, the general structure.
And then also just dealing with tradition and perception of women in the church. We have that like women giving prayers, maybe having like a class for like the men and women during church, like to meet together, talk about their different roles together as opposed to separately. And also just doing like a quick scan through of like.
So this would be like a specialty class, like we have family relations or genealogy.
Yeah.
It would be specifically focused on sort of the role of men and women, and making it very clear what the church leaders expect in terms of the roles of men and women. Okay.
And one other big one is that we all know who in the quorum of the 12 went to school where and had what job, and how, oh, this guy is so brilliant, and that will be brought up. You know, everyone's very aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we looked at the Relief Society General Presidency. There's only one person on the entire board who even has like a master's degree listed in her biography. And a lot of them, well, a few of them didn't even graduate from college. It all says, oh, they're like the mother of 6 or 7 children. I think maybe, I mean, I know that these are like called by God, but you think that they could find someone to call who has a different background, like maybe someone who's really successful in their career.
Okay, so you want more visibility on women leaders and sort of their background. Okay. Okay, so team 5.
Yeah, I think that was our team. You know, because so many ideas have already been put up there, maybe just to bring the one that we thought that isn't on the board yet, is we thought in general conference a lot of times, and general conference is a very public setting, not to the church, but also to the world. And we spoke about how so many times when women get up to speak in general conference, if it's the primary president, she's like, okay, I'm gonna talk to the primary children here. Or when, you know, the Relief Society president gets up, she's kind of giving a talk focused to like the women in the church. And so sometimes we thought, and I've heard people say this before, you know, when like a woman gets up to speak in general conference, like, okay, I'm gonna go to the bathroom, I'm gonna go to the or something. Because it doesn't carry the same weight as some of the other apostles. And so if maybe there was somewhat of a shift that when Sister Beck gets up and gives a message, she's talking about, and it's not that this has never happened, but she's talking about the power of the atonement or repentance or something to the same level as like, you know, when Elder Holland gets up to speak, everybody comes in, sits down, and nobody says a word. So kind of if talks in that kind of public setting could be given an equal doctrinal importance as some given by apostles and members of the 70, I think that would go far to change the perception.
So women are, they're speakers in general conference, they're not speaking to a specific group, primary, or the young women, or women, or whatever. The church. Okay, all right, good. Group 6. Yes.
Okay, so we talked about how a lot of our perspectives on the treatment of women start in the home, and so we talked about an idea of possibly having some kind of documentary or series of moral messages where we can look at the apostles or general authorities in their homes and how they treat women in the home, just to set an example.
So some sort of a documentary or other sort of preferably visual learning tools that show the example by the leaders. Okay. In the church. Good. 6. And different things. 7. Anything?
So we felt like the main problem is a misunderstanding of doctrine that creates a bad perception that we're dealing with right now.
Okay.
And so we wanted to really try to distinguish between doctrine and culture in the church.
Okay.
And so just kind of based off of President Packer's teaching that doctrine understood changes attitudes and behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to, it's already been mentioned, but have a specific class about understanding the priesthood. And within that class, you can address the roles of men and women in God's plan and within the priesthood, but that it's really focused on understanding the priesthood as a doctrine.
And families would attend that, not just men or women.
Right.
It'd be a familial course that's taught much like the finance course that you have, like the self-reliance course or something like that. Another thing that we talked about were the meetings, the ward meetings typically, not necessarily sacrament meeting or like Sunday school or priesthood, like PEC is many times, and maybe I don't understand as much, but many times I feel like we're not talking about things that we couldn't talk about in ward council and PEC, and that many times PEC and the ward council are somehow delineated as like, okay, in this meeting we don't need the women, in this meeting we somehow do. And we kind of talked about maybe that's like a cultural thing, that if there was a centralized meeting, not necessarily like bishopric meeting, but like a centralized meeting where all of the members of ward council would serve as the PEC members, not just like separate entities that we would invite in once a month to hear about what's going on in their organizations.
Yeah, and the council, I mean, as a matter of fact, that it's called priesthood executive committee means, you know, would suggest that it is for priesthood, but there is this sort of question of the roles of the different leadership councils in a ward, and when does it make sense to have women involved versus men, and be real clear about why and how. Okay. Team 8. Yes.
Okay, so we talked about how the issue was something that sort of started, I guess, in your youth almost, like growing up with women in excellence and like the boys program, which is like Boy Scouts. We just thought that like if we integrated at a younger age perhaps, that people would grow up better understanding that like although like the gender, like men and women are different, that like they fulfill equally important roles. So we thought like some things that were sort of unfair are that young women sort of grow up learning how to like sew or like knit and then like cook, while the young men are like doing their Eagle Scout stuff, like building fires, like making tents and stuff, which like for me at least, like I would like to learn those skills. I don't think like you have to be a guy to like if I were stranded out in the wilderness, like I would probably want to know how to like make a fire. And like maybe if I were a guy in college, I'd probably want to learn how to cook a meal for myself. So like maybe like from
It's
a
true,
very
many
young
of the guys need.
We're not get old after a little while.
So we were hoping to like maybe like not necessarily like get rid of Boy Scouts and like Women in Excellence, but maybe create like this like hybrid kind of activity, or like maybe even a supplement. Like I know that like I grew up with like mutuals, like having like them together, or like both like young men and young women combined, but like in those activities we played like sports. We didn't necessarily like learn the skills that are emphasized in each in our like respective groups. So that was like our main point that we wanted to address, like from the very beginning.
Okay.
Sort of like
And we're seeing some of this happen now with the women age being lowered, with young men and young women now attending mission prep classes together in wards. There's more of the sense that you're doing certain things together and they're getting the same thing. And you're saying more of those kinds of, we're going to work on this skill together, whatever it is.
Exactly.
And we'll do it. Okay, good. Team 9. Yes?
So we know the whole missionary thing, one of the things we talked about was encouraging women to go on missions as much as we do men. And obviously it's not a priesthood responsibility, but we talked about the fact that as a member of the church it can be a responsibility as well.
Okay.
So treat that in the same way. And not to say that women have to go, but not to make it so clear, like, I don't know, that it's, just try to encourage them as much as we do men. I think that's the same. And then we talked about,
let me ask this question.
Yeah.
How many of you in here think that the fact that the women age was lowered, in particular, has somehow created more of a sense of equality between men and women in the church? Or if you think it has, raise your hand. I just am curious. And how many of you think it hasn't really made a difference? Okay, so the majority thinks it's made
I think like
a difference in terms of.
So I think it made a little bit of difference, but at the same time, 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, it still solidified a difference instead of
it being exactly different. Adam?
I think it made a larger difference almost outside of the church, because the missionary force is always what is seen by the rest of the world, like that's the Mormon church. And now that you're seeing a ton of women out there, the actual now mental thing is, oh, it's now the Mormon church is men and women, and that's what they get to see all the time.
Okay. Yeah.
9 out of the 10 girls in here raised their hand to say that it has made gender
a difference in their minds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's meaty.
Alicia?
Yeah, I think it made a difference in just not just mission is timing, right? Like when you come on a mission for your 21, you have like a year left of school and you're like, well, I either graduate or I go on a mission. Like I'm not married, I'm gonna go on a mission. Like I think so much of it's timing, and I think it closed the gap and it like helped a lot of girls make that decision. It like made it more fair.
Yeah.
For a girl to choose who wants
To choose them. Okay. So we could talk more about this. I just was curious. The reason I raise it is just to alert you to the fact that these kinds of policy, these sort of changes do influence the way our perceptions in terms of our relationships and our roles. I think they do make a difference.
And the thing about that is, with the age change, we saw more missionaries, and now we're seeing sister missionary zone leaders, right, and sister missionary district leaders, and so that infrastructure has changed completely. Something we thought was impossible, right, because it just doesn't happen. But the age change changed that as well, and so if they're encouraged the same way, we might see more changes like that. Things that we thought, oh wait, women can't be a district leader, women can't be a zone leader. All of a sudden, more changes that could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So was there 10 teams, or was there just 9? One more. Last one.
Yeah, we actually talked about how the church has historically come out and actually made like proclamations on some things that are more sensitive. So we talked about actually doing a proclamation on womanhood,
okay,
where they are able to address many parts of this issue and lay out sort of church doctrine on it. Well, what is doctrine? What is sort of more social? And then outline sort of the respect we have for women in their roles, but also welcoming them to expand and grow and pursue other things.
Okay. All right. So some interesting suggestions. Now what I want to do for a moment, I don't want any more solutions. I just want you to ask questions about the issue. We're going to do some questions for me. Questions?
What if doctrine was not an issue?
Okay.
Okay.
What if doctrine?
Okay.
Was not an issue. Okay.
What if the, I don't know if like this is, let's say, what if the church was more public with saying these are things that are coming from God and these are things that are more like stemming from cultural, like with blacks in the priesthood, they posted a link on their website about, here's an essay about blacks in the priesthood, but what if it was a more, hey, general conference, let's talk about this that came from a cultural thing so that it's no longer doctrine in the minds of the time.
So it's sort of what's church policy, tradition,
yeah, and being open about how it's
versus
changed
doctrine from God,
and destroying the eternal same exact church thing, and nothing happens in that instance.
Okay,
I just found myself asking, kind of as we talked about these issues, I kept on being like, wait, can we do that? Can we do it? Like, what does the doctrine say now that like about, you know, priesthood functions and responsibilities and what is a priesthood responsibility, what isn't? I just found myself a little unclear about those things. So really clarifying the doctrine that we have.
Okay. What else? Spencer?
What if every single male in the church died?
Hey, in answer to the first question, what would happen if doctrine were the only issue? Is all we had was a blank sheet of paper that listed all the doctrine? How would we create an organization? Given the culture we have today and what we expect to do.
So the original question was that, like, we've made the statement, women feel disrespected, right? And so the question, why? Why do they feel disrespected? That was an assumption we're making.
Right. But the question is, why do women often feel like they're not treated equally?
Yeah.
Right? And as you raise that, one of my questions is, what is the direct antecedent? What happens right before a woman notices that she doesn't feel the same level of respect? Right? I mean, what is it that is sort of the direct antecedent that would trigger that would cause that that thought?
That would be the start of a 5-question series, right? Why do you feel that way? Why?
Okay, so why do women feel lack of respect? And it's sort of what are the antecedents to a woman feeling a lack of respect? Carrie?
I think, what if women were asked to be the primary providers?
Okay. And by the way, just so you know, 70% of women will be the primary provider for their family at some point in time during their lives. So the majority will, whether it's because they don't marry, because they're working and supporting the husband, perhaps in an educational endeavor, or because they divorce, or their husband passes away. So,
Is this global?
What's that?
This is a global.
This was in the church.
In the church.
In the church.
Okay.
At least this was reported in a presentation to the faculty that Lee Perry made a couple of years ago. So I didn't see exactly what his source was, but my assumption was 70%. 70%. Yeah, 70% of women. So what if women were the primary providers?
Yes. So going along with what you said, then they would have to be more prepared for it, and like how men would alter that.
Okay. Adam.
Sort of, why do prophecies exist in the Bible and not now? And And then kind of extending off of that, what if Julie B. Beck ran the church? How would it look?
I'm just going to put the position of vice president or woman. What if they live in the church? How is it different? Okay.
Just on that same line, what if, like, the roles are switched? What if women held the priesthood and men didn't? What kind of church would it be?
Some people would say that instead of the women doing most of the things in the church, they do everything. Right? Sean?
What if the Book of Mormon were true?
What?
What if the Book of Mormon were true?
And what's the, there's another question that has to be going with that.
Yeah, so what does it mean if the Book of Mormon is true about priesthood keys and organization of the church?
At least that we should have
Just gonna put it out there, guys.
Okay.
Do men see instances of disrespect, and do they see it as an actual problem or an issue?
Do men see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So do men see the problem? They really see and sort of understand the problem. And what was the second part of that?
And so, do they see, I guess, instances of disrespect, and then
Okay.
do they see that as an issue, or is it not a big deal?
Okay, do they see instances of this, and do they actually see it or think of it as a problem? Josh?
So why can women use priesthood in the temple, not outside?
Okay. Why do women perform priesthood ordinances in the temple? Okay. Yeah.
What if men had gays?
How would that change our perceptions of things?
Like, why is the priesthood weighted more than female attributes, I guess?
Okay. Who's had their hands up and I haven't called on them yet today?
What if Wilford Woodruff's quote, "Like the prophet of God could not lead the church astray," was not given under inspiration?
I'm just going to put Wilford Woodruff's quote. Okay, Andrew?
I don't know any of this. On an international level, how do you overcome cultural or societal norms?
Yeah. In fact, you could also ask, I'm going to do, what role does societal or cultural norms play in this, and how do you overcome them? Because this issue is perhaps even a greater issue in some cultures than it would be in the United States. Right? The sort of national cultures play. How do you overcome? Okay, let me just get one more.
What would happen if we stopped patronizing women, like in general conference with so many conference talks, like patting their back and saying, okay, like you have a divine role? And is that kind of adding to the problem?
Okay, and Brady, I'll give you the last question.
I was thinking, for an individual, where does self-confidence and self-respect come from?
Mm-hmm.
Feeling that way.
where does, for both men and women,
Yeah.
where does self-confidence and self-respect come from? Let me ask you, do you think it's helpful to ask these questions? To try and get more insight into what the problem might be? If you were actually going to come up with a solution to this that you think would make a difference, don't you think you'd want to try to find out the answers to some of these questions first? So we do this all the time. In the real world, we have a problem, and we jump to, let's try this solution. Let's try this solution. Let's try this solution. And what you don't know, and this is where you have a lot of the challenges, and this is why, for example, understanding things like where does self-respect come from for both men and women, or why do women feel, what are the antecedents to a woman feeling a lack of respect, is that, you know, you could say, well, what if we have women sit on the stand, or what if we give the recite president an office, where we create some of those visible things, but what if that has nothing to do with why women feel a lack of respect? Now, men may think that having, sitting on the stand or having an office is a signal of respect, but do women think of respect in the same way that men do? I don't know. And this is why, you know, really understanding and now going and trying to answer some of these questions, because for many of you, it seems clear from your questions, you're not clear on what's doctrine and what's tradition and policy and what's culture, and therefore there's a lack of clarity for you as part of this process, and you're not quite sure what might be causing the problem. Is this a big problem? Is it a little problem? Right? Is it getting, you know, better, worse? So there are a whole set of questions that are really important to understand. And if you can then, once you've gone through this in terms of a problem-solving process, ask the questions first and then say, okay, now we're going to vote. And we don't have time to do it here, but you're going to each get 3 votes or 5 votes, and we're going to vote on which questions we think are the most important ones we've got to really understand before we jump to solutions. Then we vote, and then you pick the 3 to 5 questions and you say, okay, we're going to try and answer these. We're going to go gather some data, we're going to run some experiments if we have to. Let's go see if we can answer those and get the, you know, bring more insight and data to bear. Then when we come back, then we're ready to jump to traditional brainstorming, which is really solution storming, where you jump to the solution. Can you see how you might come up with a more creative and effective solution if you start your process with questioning? So questions are really, it's really interesting how, especially with brainstorming, it can quickly open you up to consider new things in ways that you wouldn't have thought of before. And I think that's really one of the things that I want to teach you with regard to being a creative problem solver is the powerful role that questioning plays in the process. Why can't I see the picture you've taken right now? This is what Edwin Land's daughter asked at her birthday party when the picture was taken, and she probably said it more than once. Why, right? And Land said, you know what? I actually asked myself that question, and I really then asked, why can't we see? Why couldn't? What would have to happen in order for us to see a picture immediately? And he said after he got this question from his granddaughter, within 4 hours he had sort of worked out the basic theory around how this sort of Polaroid technology might work for seeing a picture immediately. It was a question that triggered the process. So, questions are really important, because if you're coming up with an answer but to the wrong question, then it's pretty useless, as Peter Drucker once said, who's one of sort of the great management thinkers of our day. So, what are examples of good questions? We'll just make sure we sort of review these. So we understand there's this why questions. So whys help us to reach backward into the causal chain. So when you're trying to understand what causes what, that's really when you want to use why, and then why again, and you can use the 5 whys process to try and get back and understand what causes what. And this really helps you with what is in effect a root cause analysis. And as Jeff Jones, one of the innovators we interviewed for Innovators DNA said, he says that sometimes there's just a certain personality that keeps asking why. Like my 2-year-old son, they ask why, they don't stop. Once you discover asking why in a different way and not being content with what the answer is, it's interesting what happens. You can discover new things. Really trying to understand the whys are often really important. For me, I think if you're like me, as someone who's a person of faith, sometimes you'll get these questions and you're not quite sure the answers. And I remember, I guess it's probably 4 or 5 years ago, when Prop 8 passed in California, a senior faculty member at the Wharton School, Sid Winter, he was the chief economist for the GAO. He's very famous as the father of evolutionary economics. He's been out to my winter strategy conference. A friend sent an email blast to the whole group of anybody who had been to my conference, and basically said, "Why aren't you standing up to your church leaders? This is, what your church is doing, denying what he was viewing as gay rights." And he came and admitted his son was gay. He said, "I think this is wrong, and I think it's bigoted." So how do you respond to that? So I had to respond to that issue. And I had to make sure, at least I felt comfortable with what the answer was. And I'm going to share that with you. And also it touched on other questions, why questions that you may have received or thought of related to churches, sort of, why did we have this period when blacks weren't given the priesthood? Why did we have polygamy? Right? These are sometimes questions that are asked, and I found that if you can address them with others of faith in a way that you could sort of talk about it, sometimes if I can come up with what is a reasonable answer or someone else can, certainly God has a better answer than what I've got, right? But I will share that with you. Understanding the whys are often very important to making decisions about, again, why we do things or why we're going to behave the way that we do. So I'll send that out to you in an email. What if questions? They're not about reaching back into the causal chain, right? They're trying to help you stretch forward to imagine future scenarios. So this is actually, these questions are great for those with imagination and imagining a future, a different future, and how you might get there, and trying to see what's next. And that's why it's really important for creativity. So it's what if. It explores how the future might unfold. So what future states of the world might emerge in terms of customer needs, technologies, regulations, globalization. What if this happened? How would this change what we might do? And this helps us to imagine and think about and project and predict the future. And good strategy is often about seeing the future before somebody else and then building something to meet the needs of a future set of customers before anybody else has done it. Of course, we talked about sometimes these kinds of questions are good. What if questions are good if they impose constraints on your thinking? What if we were legally prohibited? And another way to think about it, well, what if we hadn't hired this person or installed this equipment or implemented this process or pursued this strategy? Would we do it today? This helps us to eliminate the constraints or some costs we might sort of feel from prior decisions. So what ifs are really good for imagining future states of the world. The other thing, if we think about what if questions, they help us explore through analogy. So, for example, what if TV watching were more like reading a magazine? So, in effect, this is actually how TiVo changed TV watching when they first introduced the ability to record TV shows. You can now jump over the advertisements, stop it, go answer the door, come back to it, very much like the benefits of a magazine. There are some benefits of a magazine over TV watching. We did this in class. What if a dishwasher were more like a microwave? That helped us to provoke some new, different ideas and associations, like trying to cross things that hadn't been crossed together before. So sometimes these questions can really provoke new ideas if you can sort of push through with these different analogies. Let's say you're trying to explore a low-end disruption or a new market, more of a blue ocean sort of strategy. Well, is there a large population of people who have not had the the money, equipment, or skill to do this thing for themselves, and as a result have gone without it altogether, or need to pay someone else with more expertise to do it for them. So that would be one way to look for an opportunity in a market. Or are there customers at the low end of the market who'd be happy to purchase a product with less but good enough performance if they could get it at a lower price? So how do you improve your questioning skills? One of the things I want to have you do in one of the assignments is for you to for the next week until our next class period, to sit down and write down at least 10 questions a day, just about things that are, you think, important, interesting, but it could be frivolous too. Just what are the questions that you are facing? I had someone do this, worked for a pharmaceutical company, was an executive MBA student actually at BYU years ago. 3 months after he did this, he called me and he said, my boss just called me and he said, what are you doing differently? Something's different. He said, you are now raising important questions for our group and helping us to think more strategically about where we need to go. And then he described that he was doing this question storming every morning. And it was just getting him to think about the company, the division, the competitors, the industry. He'd ask those questions, he'd write them down, and then he could draw on them during the day as they would be wrestling with issues or problems. And then he could sort of pull those out and help the sort of team, move the team. 3 months after that, he called me and he was actually promoted to be in their strategic planning area, their headquarters, because he had now become a strategic thinker. And he said that improving his questioning skill was probably the most important thing he did to make that happen. So that's one thing that you can do, is sit down and write questions about challenges, opportunities that you might be facing. Question storm, use that as a technique, either individually or with a team. It's better with a team because then it provokes more associational thinking as others generate questions. And when facing a problem, you might ask yourself, how might someone from an entirely different field or context think about this? Questions could be really powerful for helping you think differently. We just close by saying, I had a professor here named Bonarici when I was getting my MBA. I still remember he was really good at asking questions that provoked insight. There was a priesthood commemoration event. He came in and noted how a leader at the meeting had said, we have 89% attendance. This is really good attendance. He says, let's go and let's shoot for it and see if we can invite people next time we have something so we can get 100% attendance. And this was his question. I wonder if 89% attendance is too high. You're like, what? I wonder how many people went to that meeting when they should have been attending to something more important. In their family, in their relationship with their spouse, with a child, with a parent, with a friend, with a neighbor. I wonder how many people were at the meeting that shouldn't have been. Now, I wouldn't have thought of that as a question, right? It gets you to think a little bit differently. But that's what the power of questions can do, is they help you to think differently and help you to explore new possibilities. And that's really the catalyst and the power of creative thinking, is to try and help people to think differently about a problem and a potential solution to the problem. So, good, thanks. We'll see you next time.